A celebration of the life of Charles Beverly Cox. Charles Beverly Cox, known as Woot or Woody to his mom and sisters, Dad to my brothers, sister and me, Grandpa to all his grandkids, and Charlie to Mom and almost everyone else, was born in Mangum, Oklahoma on July 26, 1926. Charlie was the third child, but the first and only boy, born to Clifton Leon Tip Cox and Anna Mae McCulloch Cox. He had two beautiful sisters, Mary Jo and Gwyneth. Dad was born in a hospital in Mangum, Oklahoma, Greer County. According to him, the greatest town in the whole world, better than Mayberry. This is the first of many houses Dad lived in. In fact, if you were ever lucky enough to drive through Mangum with Dad, you would think there probably wasn't very many streets that he didn't live on. Dad's youngest memories played out like a Norman Rockwell painting. Stories of him aggravating his sisters by wearing their ruffled anklets when he would leave the house in the morning to deliver newspapers, and them threatening to kill him because his rough feet would rub holes through them, or trading hats with other boys and bringing home headlights to the girls, but never having them himself, and of course horning in on them when they would have dates, or but a few of the memories that he has told. One of Dad's favorite all-time memories was of him and his dad going to the world's greatest hamburger joint, Hamburger Inn. The original building was similar to one of those portable buildings that we used to have here in Wichita, like Calvin's, or where Estelitas used to be. Just one room with maybe 8 or 10 bar stools, lined up at the counter. Tip would read the newspaper while little Charlie would watch Lee Garrett cook the burgers right in front of him. Lee would take that fresh ground beef, press those caramelized onions on top, then take that old coffee pot that Dad always assumed was full of beef suet and pour a little on each burger, flipping it over and doing it again. And of course there were buttered buns on the grill, toasting while the meat was cooking. When Dad would tell you about it, your mouth would water. The Hamburger Inn is still open, and if you are ever in that area, you must stop by and eat a burger. Unfortunately, Lee is long gone, and so is the coffee pot with the special flavoring. But it's still a really good place to eat. People come from all over to eat there. Dad's worst memory was when his father and mother divorced. I don't believe Dad ever got over it. It broke his little 9-year-old heart. Dad made a promise to himself right then and there that if he were to ever marry, he would never get divorced. His dad moved to Texas, making it difficult to see him very often. This left his mom to finish raising the family. When we'd go back to Mangum on trips, usually to the Rattlesnake Derby, Dad would almost always say, when we entered Greer County, "Ah, smell that? The air's always fresher in Greer County." Dad would drive us around and point out numerous homes. When I say numerous, I mean like 10 to 15 homes where he had lived with his mom and sisters. Then he'd say, "I don't know why we moved so often, but it seemed we moved every time the rent came due." Being the only boy, Dad spent quite a bit of time alone, and when his mom started dating, he gave her a pretty rough time about it. There was a particular song that he would sing to her while she would be getting ready to go out on her date. It was something like, "A mother went out on a party. She left at home her baby boy." I won't torture you with the lyrics, but it's a really sad, sad song. So she would beg him not to sing it, and the sparkle in his eye and the grin when he told the story let me know he was relentless. Then he'd say, "Wished you hadn't done that." One night, Dad was home alone. His parents were out, and the girls were gone. He decided to sneak over to the movie theater to see Frankenstein. He was terrified. He would recall sitting in his chair, shaking with fear, closing his eyes and peeking through his fingers. He was just a little boy. I looked it up. It came out in 1931. I hope it was a replay, because he would have only been about 5 years old. After the movie was over, he went out the back of the theater and started heading for home. It was a pitch black night, and all he could think about was that hideous monster. Crossed the street and cut through the lot of the mechanic garage that had one of those pits in the ground where the man would get in and work on cars. As he walked by, he kept thinking that the shadows from the limbs of the trees looked like monsters' hands trying to get him. He started to hurry up a little bit, and then a large piece of plastic rose up out of that hole, and he just knew it was the monster. He said that he just about passed out. He ran all the way home without stopping. Of course, the house wasn't locked. No one locked their doors back then. No lights were on, and no one was home. So he jumped in his bed and covered up his head. He really never did like scary movies. As a teenager, he, again, was a little ornery, and me as a child would beg him every night to tell me a story. One of my favorites was when a buddy of his talked him into climbing to the top of the city water tower. If you've never really stood under a water tower, you may not realize it, but it's a pretty easy climb until you get to where the bottom of the tower goes out. Then you have to crawl sideways for a few feet until you get to where it goes up again. He thought he was going to fall and die. He proceeded to lock his legs on each rail, then pull himself to the next rail until he made it. He was so excited when he got to the top. They painted "Seniors Rule" on the side of the tower. That's where the excitement ended, because it hit him that he would have to crawl back down the same way. Plus, you have to look down to go down. Let's just say they were up there for several hours. He was fearful that the fire department would be called and everyone in town would know what they had done. They did manage to get down before daylight. He realized he wasn't crazy about heights either. Dad worked at Puckett's grocery store. These stories were always great. Women would come in, pick out bags of flour that had the most beautiful prints on them that they would make clothes out of. Of course, most of the times they would want the sacks at the bottom of the pile, so he would unload the whole pile to get them what they wanted. Then half the time they changed their mind. He would also go out back of the store and get fresh eggs from the chickens, sweep the floor, and deliver groceries. For a short while, Dad was a turkey plucker. Hands down, the worst job he ever had. He'd say the stench was horrible, and he would be covered with turkey feathers. Dad never enjoyed eating turkey after that job. If you gave him a turkey sandwich, no matter how many condiments were on it, he'd say, "Tastes like turkey feathers." Mangum being so similar to Mayberry meant only one thing. They too had a sheriff, but he was kind of more like Barney. Dad and his buddies loved to mess with him. One night they snuck up to his police car that was parked right outside the door of the police station, jacked up the back end, and poured some oil under the tires, and then they waited for the show to begin on the roof across the street from the police station. Sure enough, it wasn't long before he came running out, jumped into his car, and didn't go anywhere. He stomped on the gas until the car went flying off the jacks and went skidding all over the place, throwing smoke and oil everywhere. Luckily for Dad and the boys, they never discovered who did it. Dad went to high school at Mangum High. I don't believe anyone ever loved their school any more than he did. Mangum's mascot is the Tigers. Chuck and I often laugh because we don't know our own high school song, but we know Dad's. Hello, hello, hello everybody, how do you do? We are the boys from old Mangum High, saying hello to you. Hello, hello, hello. Dad began working for Bob Toma of Toma Amusements while I was still in high school. His job was to repair and collect the money on jukeboxes, vending machines, pinball machines, and wall boxes. He didn't realize it at the time, but this would become his lifetime career. He was a natural at it. Then came the news that broke the hearts of thousands of young mothers. The United States was to join the war that was taking place on the other side of the world. There had been several battles between Japan and the Republic of China. Japan wanted to dominate Asia and the Pacific. World War II broke out on September 1st, 1939. Dad was only 13 and probably, like most boys, excited about it, but he knew he was too young to join in. Then it happened. When Dad was 17, he got the letter that every boy expected at the time. Uncle Sam wants you. He hadn't finished high school, but he had to go. And I might as well tell all of Dad's secrets today. On the day that he was to get on the bus to ride to camp, Dad had a huge boil on his rear end. He couldn't sit, so he decided to go see the doctor whose office was above Braxton's drugstore. Dad said he was a cantankerous old man, to put it politely. He had Dad drop his pants, bend over the table, without saying a word, without any antiseptic, pain reliever, or even a whack on the head with a hammer. He shoved a knife into that boil, sending Dad to his knees. When he gathered the strength to get up off his knees, he walked across the town square to the building where the new recruits were to meet to ride the bus. By the time he got on the bus, the only seat available was right over the back tires. If shocks were invented at the time, either that bus didn't have them, or they weren't any good, according to Dad. The bus ride lasted 15 hours. Another little secret Dad never told that Chuck and I found out when Dad went into the VA hospital in March of 2014 was that when he got to the camp and it was time to sign in, that he was embarrassed of his middle name Beverly, so he proceeded to tell them it was Boyd. That made paperwork a little more difficult when he was older. He even had a social security with Boyd on it. What's interesting about that all is he named his daughter Beverly. After he signed in, him and the other new recruits had to totally strip down and put on nothing but a raincoat. And then they were forced to stand in the cold, pouring rain for hours. Dad was 6'1" and only weighed 120 pounds, soaking wet. After several hours of standing in one place, he passed out. He woke up a couple of days later in the infirmary with pneumonia. This was devastating because all his buddies had been shipped out and he was all alone. Dad didn't talk much about the war, and if he was going to, he didn't want to talk about it when it was getting close to dark. He lost a lot of friends over there. Those few years affected him for the rest of his life. When the war was over, Dad came home to Mangum, finished high school at the greatest high school in the world, Mangum High. I know Dad would want me to add that. Then he went to Mangum Junior College. Times had been hard and continued to be hard. Charlie took a job in Oklahoma City working for Buren Malone at B&B Novelty, again working on vending and pinball machines. At that time, pinball machines took up the majority of his time. They were considered to be a gambling machine, taking the wages of young men a nickel at a time. Oklahoma officials began looking into the use of these machines. Charlie didn't realize it at the time, but this move to Oklahoma City would be where he would meet the love of his life. Dorothy Lou Ringel was a waitress at Evans Drive-In on 24th and Northeastern Street in Oklahoma City. She cooked and served customers delicious meals, but kept an eye on that cute boy that came in on occasion to repair their jukebox and the pinball machine. Eventually, that cute boy, Charlie Cox, asked her out on a date. One date led to another, and the young couple fell in love and were married. The date of the occasion is still up in the air. Mom claims that they were married on October 1st, 1952. Dad always said it was the 31st because he remembered trick-or-treaters being on the street. The young couple bought their first home in Oklahoma City at 1216 Southwest 57th Street, right off Black Welder. Mom described it as a cute little house in a great neighborhood, and for a very short while, everything was good. Their first son, Charles Kendall, who was the only boy to be born in Oklahoma City at St. Anthony's Hospital, came into the world. The rest of the children were born at St. Francis Hospital in Wichita, where the couple was forced to move to shortly after purchasing their new home. The reason for this move came when the officials raided the cafes and clubs, wiping out all the pinball machines in Oklahoma City and numerous other large cities around the United States. Jobs were tight, and when Dad was asked to move to Wichita, Kansas, he had no choice but to go. He came up to Wichita, checked out the job, rented a house in northeast Wichita at 1709 East 24th. Mom was not a happy girl when she saw the home. It did not compare to the home that they had previously lived at. Dad described it to her as a beautiful little house with a white picket fence. Mom described it more like this house. And to add to the equation, people in Kansas were not friendly at all like they were in Oklahoma. People would speak to you as you passed them on the streets there, but here, if you spoke to them, they'd look at you like you lost your mind. It was a difficult time for the young couple. Dad and Mom moved from their house on 24th to 2902 South Glen on March the 15th, 1955. They raised 4 children, housed, fed, and loved 15 foster children, nieces, nephews, friends' children, and just about anyone who needed a place to stay. Dozens of people have lived in this home with them. Dad started out working for United Distributors, then worked for Music Service, next B&B Vending, later opening his own business called Sunflower Vending. Eventually, he merged his business with Stan Shelton, changing the name to Shelton Vending, then ended his career working at Boeing for Wichita Canteen, working on their vending machines. People from all over the place would call Dad and ask him to work on their machines. Many people brought their machines from all over the place to Dad's house for him to work on, or to his business for him to work on for them. He was just that good at it. No story about Dad would be complete without talking about the dogs in his life. His first dog was Paddlefoot. Then, when him and Mom moved to Wichita, they adopted Bullet, who proceeded to bite numerous people. Then there was Burglar, who thought she was a person. She played basketball with us, let the kids from the neighborhood ride her like a horse, and most importantly, was Dad's best friend. She would go out on calls with him and ride in the back of the truck. And if anyone would come near the truck, she would let them know in no uncertain terms to back away or suffer the consequence. One night she came out on a call with him and jumped out of the back of the truck while he was inside working on a machine. He couldn't find her and came home. Later that same night, Mom and I went back and drove around through the neighborhood hollering, "Burglar! A burglar! A burglar!" Lights would come on, people would step out, but no burglar. A few days later, she showed up. Then came She was an incredible dog. She would climb trees, climb ladders, and chase balls that he would throw for hours. In the last few years, there have been several dogs that Dad has loved. Charlie Brown, Maggie, Dottie, and Nellie. He loved them, and they loved him. They loved to sit in his lap for hours and hours. Charles Beverly was preceded in death by his father, Tip Cox, his mother, Anna Mae Russell, stepfather, Burdette Russell, sister Gwyneth and her husband, Dick Morris, his other sister, Mary Jo, and her husband, Kendall Gresham, and their daughter, Elizabeth, and his aunt, Doris McCulloch Madden, best known as Aunt Nancy. If you watch the video, All Because Two People Fell in Love, that's going to include all the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Charles and Dorothy Cox. They are all here because two people fell in love.